Hi, this is Shay Jackson with Hype Math. In today's 8th grade video, we will be reviewing the math concept, estimating and calculating square roots. Let's get started. Remember, 8th graders, practice makes awesome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so that you will receive alerts when we upload new videos. We will be using the 3rd grade Math Review Workbook for the problems in this video. It is available for purchase in our store. The link to purchase the workbook will be in the description box, so go ahead and click that link and grab your book today. Let's talk about square roots. The square root of a number is the positive factor you would square to get that number. For example, the square root of 9 is 3 because 3 squared, or 3 times 3 is equal to 9. So when I square root 9, I know that the answer is 3 because, again, 3 times 3 is equal to 9. Here we have our square root chart from the square root of 1 all the way to the square root of 225. Let's look at some examples of how we can estimate or see where specific square roots are in between what numbers. For instance, the square root of 7 is 2 and 3. Because the square root of 7 is in between the square root of 4, which is equal to 2, and the square root of 9, which is equal to 3. When looking for an estimation or what two integers the square root of 52 is between, our answer would be 7 and 8 because the square root of 52 is between the square root of 49, which is 7, and the square root of 64, which is 8. Let's look at some more examples. When looking at the two integers that the square root of 206 is between, the answer is 14 and 15 because the square root of 206 is in between the square root of 196, and the square root of 196 is 14, and the square root of 225, which is 15. So when we are looking for what square root the two integers it is between, you look to see where the square root lies and then look at the integers for those square roots. Let's look at one more example. Looking for the two integers that the square root of 150 is between, we would say 12 and 13 because the square root of 150 is between the square root of 144 and the square root of 169. The square root of 144 is 12, and the square root of 169 is 13. And that is how you find the integers when you're giving a square root, finding the integers where it would fall in between. Let's try some other problems on our own. We have the square root of 40, the square root of 181, the square root of 75, and the square root of 10. So starting with the square root of 40, look to see where that square root falls in between, which square roots that square root falls in between. Also, the square root of 181, which two square roots does the square root of 181 fall in between. Same thing for the square root of 75. Take a look at that. And also the square root of 10. Let's see if you chose the correct integers. For the square root of 40, the two integers would be 6 and 7 because the square root of 40 is in between the square root of 36 and the square root of 49. The square root of 36 is 6 and the square root of 49 is 7, and that is why our two integers are 6 and 7. Looking at the square root of 81, which two square roots does the square root of 181 fall in between? It is between the square root of 169 and 196. The square root of 169 is 13, and the square root of 196 is 14. So the square root 181 falls in between the two integers 13 and 14. Let's move to the next two square roots. The square root of 75, the two integers are 8 and 9 because the square root of 75 falls in between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. The square root of 64 we see is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9, and that is why 8 and 9 are our two integers. Finally, the square root of 10, the integers are 3 and 4 because the square root of 10 is in between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. We can see based on our chart that the square root of 9 is equal to 3, and the square root of 16 is equal to 14. And that is an example of when given a square root, how you can find the two integers that square root falls in between. Now let's see how we can use a calculator to find the square root. When you have a calculator, what you will look for is the square root sign and also the equal sign, because you will push the square root, you enter the number, and then you put the equal sign. If you are using a TI calculator, you have to push the second shift and the X squared button in order for you to get the square root number. And I'll show you an example in the next slide. Okay, so here is our TI-84 calculator. And if you have something that's above a TI-84 calculator, it's still the same. In order for us to get the square root, we click the second button, which is at the top left hand corner, and then we push the X squared, because if you notice right above the X squared button you see the square root. After that you push in the type in the number and hit enter in order for you to get the answer. Let's look at some estimations of finding the square root rounded to the nearest hundredth. When we enter the square root of 325, our answer is, rounded to the nearest hundredth, remember, is 18.03. It's the square root of 325 rounded to the nearest hundredth is 18.03. And what you can do to follow along is get a calculator, whether it's the Google calculator online, or if you have another type of online calculator, or you have a handheld calculator. Follow along and press in the numbers so that you can see you get the same answers, okay? Looking at the square root of 107, our answer rounded to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 places after the decimal point, is 10.34. Now you try. Type in the square root, grab a calculator, whether it's online or you have a handheld calculator. Find the square root of 247, the square root of 190, and the square root of 72. I'll give you a few seconds to type it in. And remember, if you're using a TI-84 or higher calculator, all you need to do is push the second button and the X squared button so that you can get the square root. You type in the number and press enter to get the answer. If you're using an online calculator, like for instance, the calculator shown is the Google online calculator, all you click is the square root button, enter in the number, and hit that equal sign for you to get the answer. Okay, let's look and see what our answers are. 247 is equal to 15.72. The square root of 190 is approximately 13.78. And lastly, the square root of 72 is approximately 8.49. So this is how, when you are trying to find the square root, you can enter it into your calculator, and most times the answer will ask for you to round to the nearest hundredth or the nearest thousandths. Okay, let's move on to the problems in our book. Number 1 says, which point on the number line best represents the location of the square root of 92? A, point M, B, point N, C, point P, D, point Q. The first thing we need to do is ask ourselves, what are we looking for? This will help us determine what information we need and how also we need to solve the problem. We are looking for the point on the number line that best represents the location of the square root of 92. What information can help us find the answer? The information that can help us find the answer is us looking at the square root chart that we had earlier, we were reviewing earlier, to see which two numbers that the square root of 99 is in between. And as we see, it is in between the square root of 81 and also the square root of 100. How can we solve the problem? In order for us to solve the problem, what we need to do is find the integers of the square root of 81 and also the square root of 100, and find the point that is closest to the square root of 92. So in looking at our chart, we see that the square root of 81, the integer for the square root of 81 is 9. And the square root of 100 is equal to 10, okay? So we see where the square root of, the point M, we see where point M is, we see where point N is, point P, and also point Q. Now, as we're looking at the square root of 92 and where the point would be, also pay attention to the square roots that it is in between. It's in between the square root of 81, which we know the integer is 9, and also the square root of 100. So we will ask ourselves, Is the square root of 92 closer to the square root of 81, or is it closer to the square root of 100? And that can help us eliminate some of our answers. Based on that information, what do you think the correct answer is? If you said D point Q, you are absolutely correct because, again, we said that the square root of 90, we asked ourselves, which is the square root of 92 closer to? Is it closer to the square root of 81, or is it closer to the square root of 100? And yes, it's closer to the square root of 100. Okay, based on that information, we know that the square root of 100 is equal to 10. So point Q, I'm sorry, the square root of 92 would be closer to 10, and that is point Q. Let's move to our next problem. Point Q is shown on the number line. This is another point Q, by the way. Which value is best represented by point Q? F, the square root of 5.4, G, the square root of 29.5, H, the square root of 35.5, or J, the square root of 5.9. What are we looking for? We are looking for the value that is best represented by point Q. What information can help us find the answer? The information that can help us find the answer is finding the values of the square roots of our answers, okay? So let's do that. In looking at the square roots of our answer, the square roots of our answer choices and their values, it can help us make a determination about which value best represents point Q. Okay, we see that the square root, starting with F, we see that the square root of 5.4 is equal to 2.32. And again, on our number line, 5, 6, and 7 are integers or whole numbers, okay? Looking at G, the square root of 29.5 is equal to 5.43. H, the square root of 35.5 is equal to 5.96. And J, the square root of 5.9 is equal to 2.43. In looking at these numbers, what would you say would be the correct answer in the point that is best represented, the value that is best represented by point Q? If you say G, you are absolutely correct. So let's just take a look. We know that we can immediately cross out answer F and also answer J because they are the square root of 5. But the square root of 5 is closer to 2, and that's not even on the number line. So immediately we can get rid of the square root of the answer choice F and answer choice J. So all we need to focus on is answer choice G and answer choice H. For answer choice G, 5.43, in looking at point Q on the number line, we see that it is close to 5.5, but it's right before it, okay? Because that middle line in between 5 and 6 is the half, the halfway mark, and that represents 5.5. So H is wrong because the square root of 35.5 is 5.96. Well, that's not it because 5.96, the point would be 6, okay? G is our correct answer. Let's move to the next question. Paula completely covered a square wall using 87.5 square feet of wallpaper without any overlap. Which measurement is closest to the side length of this wall in feet? A, 22 feet, B, 44 feet, C, 9 feet, D, 7 feet. What are we looking for? We are looking for the measurement that is closest to the side length of the wall in feet. What information can help us find the answer? The information that can help us find the answer is that the square wall is 87.5 square feet, so we need to look for the square root of 87.5 and also feet squared, because if you notice, the question says which measurement is closest to the side length of this wall in feet. Well, 87.5 is square feet, but we're only looking for feet, which means we need to find the square root of the number and also the measurement. How do we solve the problem? In order for us to solve this problem, what we can do is use our handy dandy square foot chart, okay? And we can look and see what two square roots does the square root of 87.5 fall in between. Look at the integers for those numbers to see what would our correct answer be. Okay? What is our correct answer? Okay, so in looking for the two square roots that 87.5 falls in between, I would say the square root of 81 and the square root of 100. The square root of 87.5 falls in between these two square roots. Okay, so since I know that, the next thing I would do is look for the integer of those square roots. The square root of 81, the integer for the square root of 81 is equal to 9, and the integer for the square root of 100 is equal to 10. Now we can look at our answer choices to find what our correct answer is. And based on that information, C is the correct answer because, again, the square root of 87.5 falls in between the two square roots of the square root of 81, that integer is 9, and the square root of 100, that integer is 10. So we don't see a 10, all we see is C, 9 feet, and that is our correct answer. And that is it, 8th graders, for reviewing the estimation and calculation of square roots. Again, in order to follow along in our videos, we will be using the 8th grade Math Review Workbook, and it can be purchased by clicking that link in the description box. This is Shay Jackson with Hype Math. I will talk to you later.